minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start. Liftoff of America's first space shuttle. And the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Hi, I'm Chad Tyler, and this is a program about America's space adventure and the astronauts. It's an exciting life, and we're going to show you who the astronauts are, what they do, how they're chosen, and how they're trained to fly into the universe. We're talking about living and working and sleeping and even having fun in a thin metal craft soaring through space.
A world where you bring everything with you. It's hard to imagine, but remember, out there, nothing. No air, no water, no gravity, nothing. Well, for example, where the astronauts walked on the moon, those footprints are still there just as they left them. And no wind on the moon, no rain, nothing to disturb the signs of the 12 Americans who have been there. And without a spacesuit, of course, you'd be dead in a flash. If not from the extreme heat in the sun or the extreme cold in the shadows, then surely from the bubbles that form in your blood from the lack of air pressure. And that's what we know will kill you. Well, the truth is, being an astronaut is a dangerous business because it's all about the unknown. Well, that was especially true in the beginning. I mean, back in the 1950s, when America got into this whole space adventure, no one really knew what to expect. But can you imagine asking someone to sit up there on the nose of a rocket? I mean, especially back then, when a lot of the rockets they were testing blew up or just fell over.
Funny looking now, but real scary back then. But when the call was put out for volunteers, they came flocking. From the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. All military back then, and all men.
Well, that's not the way it is today. This is what a modern-day class of astronauts looks like. Men and women from all different kinds of backgrounds. And many of them don't even know how to fly. I mean, they don't have to do their jobs. Well, I'll tell you about all that a little later. But in the beginning, only men. Jet jockeys, fighter pilots, test pilots who seemed to be happy only when they were flying faster or higher than any others had gone before, scraping the sky's edges. But there was a limit they couldn't surpass. No matter how hard they pushed their machines, they were still sucked down by Earth's gravity. The sky was the limit. To go any farther or any faster, they had to fly high enough to escape gravity. And it was Alan Shepard who became the first American to soar into history. He did it tucked into a Mercury capsule balanced on the nose of a Redstone rocket. Well, this first shot was designed to see if we could blast a man up to the edge of space and bring him back alive. And Shepard did that. And when he fell into the sea, America had fallen in love with space adventure. And those very special men, the first 7 chosen. For these star voyagers, a new word was invented: astronaut. Well, then it was 7. Today there are many astronauts in constant training, each one waiting for the next assignment. That could be to a permanent manned station on the moon. It could be a 3-year flight to Mars. It could be a construction job on a space station, the beginning of the first homes. No one knows where exploring space is going to lead us, or when we're going to get there. That's part of the adventure, part of being an astronaut. We don't know where we're going next, but we do know where it started. It's really quite a story. Here's how it began. In 1957, the Russians were first into orbit with a small, unmanned globe called Sputnik. Next, the Russians sent a dog up. And then, only 48 months after Sputnik, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was the first human being in space. America almost went into shock. So, President John F. Kennedy pledged to the Congress and the country that we were going to put a man on the moon in less than 10 years.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
You want to know the truth? At the time of the President's promise, we were still just suiting up. Still just getting ready for the Mercury mission that finally put John Glenn into orbit.
Lots of grades fired. Okay.
Roger, 7. You have a go. At least 7 orbits.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous. Roger, understand go for at least 7 orbits.
Well, the Mercury missions were now going full steam. Pictures of the astronauts in training and testing became familiar. There was a feeling that we had to beat the Russians to the moon. And before the race was over, the United States had 300,000 people working on the project, which was now proceeding step by step. Space exploration is based on high technology and complicated physics. But to keep the country in the race, you need real people, heroes to root for. And it's worth taking a last look at what we call this class picture of the original 7 who would become those heroes. Deke Slayton was flying combat missions against the Nazis when he was only 18 years old. Wally Schirra flew 90 combat missions in Korea. His dad and mom were also pilots. John Glenn was a Marine and the most decorated war hero in the group. Al Shepard was also a fighter pilot, the first astronaut to go up, and the only one of the 7 to actually land on the moon. Scott Carpenter was first an astronaut, then became a deep-sea explorer. Gus Grissom flew 100 combat missions in Korea. A man of few words, he was the one who said simply, "This is a risky business." Gordon Cooper was flying before he was 16. And in 1963, he ended the Mercury missions with a perfect flight of 22 orbits. The one-man space shots were over.
With the successful end of the Mercury missions, a tremendous confidence was building in our space team. The country was fascinated with space and the astronauts. A year after President Kennedy's promise to go to the moon, 9 more pilots were chosen, including Neil Armstrong. The following year, an Air Force pilot named Edwin Buzz Aldrin was chosen. You'll remember those 2 names. By the end of 1963, America had 30 astronauts.
Project Gemini came next, and for the first time, 2 astronauts went up together. The spacecraft were about the same, just bigger. Well, at the time, the most astounding adventure came during Gemini Flight 4. That was in June of 1965. Jim McDivitt was flying the capsule, while co-pilot Ed White took America's first spacewalk. The whole country and a lot of the world was listening in.
Okay, I'm out.
Okay, he's out. He's close to free.
I think I'm dragging a little bit, so I don't want to fire the gun yet. Okay, I put a little roll in, took it right out. Okay, I'm coming over.
Okay, stand by.
You see me yet?
Oh, sure does. Oh, there you are. Look at the camera on now. Okay. You're right in front, Ed. You look beautiful.
I feel like $1 million. I will pitch up. And y'all laugh.
Each project built on the shoulders of the one that went before. The Mercury missions proved that we could put a man in orbit and bring him back alive. The Gemini missions that came after Mercury were designed to answer a lot of questions about the big jump. Could we land on the moon? Could we walk in space? Well, Ed White's experience answered that. Could we dock? Could we guide 2 separate spacecraft to exactly the same orbit and actually join them while traveling at more than 17,000 miles per hour?
Surprising as it sounds, it wasn't too hard. The pilots easily caught up with and joined their Gemini capsules with Agena rockets already in orbit. Another important question was, could we stabilize and control a capsule in orbit? On this Gemini flight, Dick Gordon was assigned the job of tying up to a Nagina so that the two craft orbiting together would stabilize, stop rolling around. While trying to tie up, astronaut Gordon actually straddled the spacecraft, cowboy style.
Right up, cowboy. Now, why don't you just sit down and take a rest? Huh? How you doing? Tired, Chief. All right, just rest. Yeah, you got plenty of time. Only been out 9 minutes.
On the ground, training was going at full speed. There were still many questions that needed to be answered before going to the moon. Charlie Dry was a test astronaut, somebody they tried experiments on so the real astronauts wouldn't have to go through them.
Our function was to ride the centrifuge, which was a high acceleration chamber that we would go from 4.5 maybe up to 9.5 Gs. I was the guinea pig that rode in the centrifuge. What does it feel like? Every part of the body hurts. One of the other test functions that we performed here was the dropping of the lunar drop test. And what actually happened as the lunar lander lands on the moon, it sometimes lands pretty hard, it may land at an angle. We have to be able to determine, can the body withstand the fall? So we had a drop tower over here in one of our test cells, and we actually lifted the command module up, dropped it, and we dropped it sometimes 2 stories, sometimes 3 stories, to see actually what the subject inside, how he would react. Do your knees work, or does it crush you to the bottom?
Testing and more testing, and in some cases we learned the test turned out to be much tougher than necessary years later under real conditions. The Gemini mission splashed down as perfectly as Mercury, and the program ended with the 12th flight in November of 1966. No astronauts were lost in the space shots, but on the ground, a tragic accident occurred. Ed White, our first spacewalker, along with Roger Chaffee and Gus Grissom, were killed in a flash fire during training in an Apollo command module on the ground. The date was January 27th, 1967. All America was stunned.
Ironically, it was Gus who had said, "It's a risky business." He and White and Chaffee had been scheduled for the first Apollo mission. We lost 3 great astronauts, but NASA was building an impressive space team, and quietly the emphasis was shifting to scientific experiment. You could see it in who they were recruiting. In 1965, Owen Garriott and 5 other scientists were chosen.
In 1967, Story Musgrave and 10 more scientists joined up. By 1969, there were 73 pilots and scientists in training or ready to go. These were the Apollo years. Here at NASA today, you can see what a colossal ship we were sending up. Well, that's a Saturn V rocket with an Apollo command module on its nose. When you stand it up, it's taller than a 35-story building. And when they fired it, the power and the noise were just incredible. Driven by these huge engines, a dozen men would eventually land on the moon. But we didn't know how it was going to work. Not in the beginning. Well, first we sent up cameras orbiting the moon, then a mechanical scout called Surveyor. We wanted to know if we'd sink right into the dust on the moon's surface. At Christmas time, in 1968, we sent up Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders to be the first men to orbit the moon. The space missions now seem so comfortable they even goofed around with a home movie camera. They flew to within 70 miles of the moon's surface and beamed these pictures back to the world. None of those first 3 moon orbiters ever got a chance to land on the strange surface, but it was this voyage of Apollo 8 that that convinced the NASA Earthlings that a moon landing was truly, actually, humanly possible. And in the summer of 1969, the time had come for America to take the gamble as the whole world watched. Apollo 11 seemed to glow in the dawn of that July 16th. Liftoff was scheduled for 9:30 that morning. Of course, the astronauts had been up long before that. Michael Collins would be the pilot. He was chosen to fly the command module Columbia around and around the moon, waiting for Buzz Aldrin, who would guide the lunar module down to the moon, and Neil Armstrong, the flight commander, who would be the first man to walk on the moon. Interestingly, all three men were 39 years old. 3 days after liftoff, they approached the target. Aldrin and Armstrong had separated from the mother ship and were now guiding Eagle, that's what they named that strange-looking lunar craft, toward the moon's surface. And as they got real close, everyone was listening in.
40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. That's okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
The Eagle has landed. 4 words to mark one of the greatest adventures of mankind.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
When he first got out the door, Neil Armstrong had been told to quickly scoop up some soil and rock samples in case they had to make a fast getaway. It wasn't necessary, and about 20 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin came down the steps. They planted the American flag, and they set up a lot of scientific experiments to be left behind. Armstrong and Aldrin spent 2.5 hours on the moon, then climbed back into the module for some rest. Back on Earth, engineers and scientists prayed the Eagle would fire up and lift off as planned. When the time came, it all worked perfectly. As Michael Collins took pictures from the Columbia, the Eagle returned, docked, and the 3 astronauts began their jubilant trip home. It was a sweet splashdown, right about lunchtime, 9 days after they had blasted off to challenge the moon. You can imagine what an emotional homecoming it was for the families. But no hugs, no kisses. They were dressed in special airtight suits and put into quarantine. Earth people had no idea whether they would have picked up some strange killer moon bugs or perhaps a celestial virus. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins were probed and tested for about 2 weeks, then released for celebrations across the country. It was America's finest hour.
In the Apollo years, we sent up 6 moon landing parties. A total of 12 men actually got out and explored the lunar surface. There were 2 other ventures with Apollo-trained astronauts, but this time not on the moon. One involved the Russians.
We'll hold down till thrust builds up.
11.
Engine ready light on. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Engine sequence start. 1, 0. Launch commit. We have a liftoff. All engines building up thrust. Moving out. Clear the tower.
Roger, tower clear.
In the summer of 1975, orbiting way up in space, the 2 fiercely competitive and always top-secret space programs met and docked. The Soviet spacecraft was called Soyuz. The American command module was an Apollo. Behind the grins and warm handshakes were 2 hard years of intensive training and sharing. Astronauts and cosmonauts even learned each other's languages as well as systems. And when they shared that technology, it meant either country could go up and dock with the other in case of an emergency thousands of miles in space. And there was one other fascinating experiment that bridged the gap between Apollo and the Space Shuttle years. This was Skylab, a huge scientific laboratory in space. Actually, it was made out of the hollowed-out portion of a Saturn V rocket. NASA first fired the empty lab into orbit, and then the astronauts went up later and docked. Inside, they could move around and live in a space 25 times bigger than what they had on Apollo. There was even a special door to go out for a walk in space. 3 different crews flew up, worked in, and then left the circling Skylab. Incredible pictures were sent back and hundreds of important scientific experiments and tests performed. The last 3-man crew stayed for almost 3 months. They exercised every day, and even after all that time in space, came home healthy, and with a lot of answers to successful experiments. But Skylab was abandoned.
The attention of NASA and the country was swinging away from multi-million-dollar space shots that dumped into the sea when they were over. The new goal was to design a spacecraft that could go up and come back many times. So they developed a program called the Space Transport System, or STS, what everyone calls the Space Shuttle. Surely one of the strangest flying machines ever built.
The shuttle doesn't have engines to take off and fly like an airplane. It doesn't have big enough built-in rockets to boost it into orbit. And because it weighs nearly 100 tons, it's too heavy to be towed like a glider. But the funny thing is, on a mission, the shuttle has to do all 3 things: fly like an airplane, orbit like a command module, and glide home to a landing. As the name says, it's a shuttle, carrying people up and back from space. And if you look at who it's carrying back and forth, you'll see a dramatic change in the story of space adventure. That woman there, for example, Sally Ride, was the first American woman to shuttle into space. Far from being in the military, she graduated from college as an English major and later got a doctorate in physics. In fact, there will soon be more astronauts who are called mission specialists than there are pilot astronauts. Why? Well, some astronauts will always be required to fly and command the spacecraft. But a lot more astronauts will be needed to work and conduct scientific experiments in space. And those people, the specialists, are not pilots. They're coming from the universities and laboratories and professions. And it doesn't matter if they are men or women or fighter pilots. The very first shuttle flights came in the spring of 1981. Once again, the world was watching. Other countries don't do things publicly this way. And there is nothing quite like a shuttle launch. The outside rockets that are just bolted on go into a furious fire, lifting the orbiter nearly 30 miles into the sky in just 2 minutes. And once the tanks are empty, they're dumped. The main engines fire for 6 more minutes, and the orbiter is up there at the edge of the Earth's atmosphere. Away goes the empty external fuel tank, and finally, it's just the shuttle, with its own engines to push it into orbit and maneuver in space. It's an amazing ride. In the first 5 years, there were 25 shuttle flights. Now, mission specialists were doing serious work in space. We moved from raw adventure and exploration to business and practical testing. Remember Ed White's first spacewalk, tethered to that umbilical cord? By the 10th shuttle flight, they flew totally free in a jet-propelled seat called an MMU, or a manned maneuvering unit. As long as they had nitrogen gas in the thrusters and oxygen in their breathing tanks, they could go anywhere. As someone said, it's like riding a magic carpet. Many flights were carrying up communication satellites, delivering them precisely to where they could go into the right orbit. But even once they got up there, things could go wrong with the machinery. On this occasion, astronauts Dale Gardner and Joe Allen went out into space to snag an orbiting satellite that had cost tens of millions of dollars but wasn't working. The 5 crew members on this flight figured out a way to tie it up and pull it back into the cargo bay. And then, the next day, they snagged another one that wasn't working and brought them both back down to Earth to get fixed.
As more and more people are needed to go into space, the question is, how does NASA choose astronauts? In the beginning, they were looking for Superman. Well, of course, they didn't say that out loud, but the fact is, they only talked to daredevil pilots in perfect physical condition. By the 1980s, all that had changed.
All kinds of people were going up, including a congressman, a senator, a visiting European, even a Saudi prince. These are teachers. 10 of them were brought to NASA for screening before one finalist was chosen. And the physical exams they went through are what NASA gives all men and women who apply to be astronauts. They certainly measure everything, and they test thoroughly, but they are not looking for Superman or woman. Dwayne Ross heads the NASA committee that picks the candidates.
Most of the people who walk the streets in the U.S. could pass our physical requirements. You don't have to do 100 sit-ups, 100 push-ups, or run 10 miles, any of that kind of stuff. It's pretty much a standard medical evaluation. You've got to be in good physical condition. You've got to have pretty good vision. But other than that, there's no superhuman task involved in passing the test to be an astronaut. There are some height restrictions for the program. For mission specialists, it's from 5 feet tall to 6'4", and from pilot, it's 5'4" to 6'4". You can wear glasses. So right now, our standards for our mission specialists are 2,100, for pilots are 2,050, because the pilots do have to do a little bit more.
Well, the physical part is the easiest. You either pass or you don't. Academically, only college graduates get in, and starting early, they look for certain interests.
A 4.0 grade point average won't get you in the astronaut program in and of itself, but a 2.0 might keep you out of the astronaut program in and of itself. So stress grades, stress science and math courses. We have some basic requirements for college degrees, and it's engineering and the sciences. And so one way you can prepare for that is in math and sciences, and stress that all the way through school.
For years, astronaut pilots have been men because candidates were required to have at least 1,000 hours of experience flying hot military jets. Not mission specialists. What they're looking for there is a certain background, a lot of schooling in math or the sciences or engineering, and the specialists must have at least 3 years of professional experience after their studies.
Right out of college with a bachelor's degree you're not quite ready for our astronaut corps. We require you after that to go get some experience, some work experience. Some of that work experience can be in terms of advanced academics, master's degree, PhD, those kinds of things. But we like to see work experience. And we have a word we call operational, and it's kind of hard to define, but we're looking for people who get experience in an operational environment, and that's hands-on field type of experience as opposed to theoretical, number crunching, those kinds of things.
And finally, it gets down to more than just grades and experience. They look for a person who's shown character and self-assurance. Maybe you can say someone with nerve.
One of the things we worry about is, in addition to the teamwork, being members of groups and things like that, is also the exposure, if you will, to different kinds of environments and the adaptability to different kinds of environments. And you can do that in a lot of ways. And athletics is one. Maybe private pilot license is one, scuba diving, mountain climbing, a lot of different things that says that a person can and has a desire to expose themselves and adapt to different kinds of environments. And that's very important because we have 99% of our environment's benign, but the other 1% is different.
Could be scary.
Could be scary, could be dangerous.
Sum it all up and ask, who do they choose and how did they get there? Well, it all begins at least in high school. I mean, future astronauts are interested in the sciences, math and physics. They work hard and they're well-rounded. I mean, a great athlete alone won't make it, and just a brain won't either. And they want candidates who have some practical experience in their field after school. I mean, at least 3 years before applying. And being chosen to be an ASCAN, that's what they call astronaut candidates, it's only the beginning. Next, they train you to be an astronaut. And the training never stops.
Helmet's done. Roger. Check purge valves, both of them closed and locked.
Both are closed and locked.
Okay. It says check cooling.
And we have cooling.
Okay. Crewman, you can stand free of the dawning station and check your mobility now.
Okay. Looks like I'm mobile.
Okay, and if you want any more weight relief or less, just let us know.
Okay.
Starting the treadmill now, TD.
Roger, go ahead. Roger. Crewman, if you're ready to stop for today, we can go ahead and stop the treadmill.
For every astronaut, there are really two kinds of training programs. The first teaches the person how to do the job, whether it's piloting the shuttle or performing as a mission specialist. That's the first part, learning the job. The second part is learning what to do if something goes wrong, developing the confidence and teamwork to find solutions under pressure.
The headquarters for astronaut training is here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The formal part of the program lasts about a year. These are two astronauts who went through the class of 1985. Brian Duffy, a pilot, and Linda Godwin, a mission specialist. She and a twin sister grew up on a farm in a small Missouri town, played saxophone in the school band, was real good in math, and later got a doctorate in physics. Brian Duffy was raised just outside of Boston. His dad was a mailman, and he describes himself as growing up just an everyday kind of kid. Interested in math in high school, played a lot of ball, and then went to the Air Force Academy and ended up a test pilot before he got into astronaut training. And like everybody else, he was a little nervous when it all began.
First time I walked in here and sat down and looked around and said, this is what an orbiter is, I was a little bit concerned that maybe I wouldn't be able to learn it quite as well as I would need. As it turns out, my background, my flying background, has paid off considerably in that we learn the systems here very similar to the way you learn the systems in an aircraft when you're flying it.
There was always one person in charge of the overall training program, and right now, that's Frank Hughes.
The shuttle is an extremely complicated vehicle. I mean, there's 1,350 switches and controls in the cockpit, okay? So it's amazing that anybody can learn to fly it at all, in some sense. What you see is that people will travel from being absolutely blown away and overwhelmed by all the complexity of it and what has to be done, to the end of it, when we get them into flight training, that they tax the trainers to figure out something to do with them that they can't handle. They will all get some space medicine lectures in that first 6-month period. They'll all get some computer and electronics lectures. They'll get some Earth science and some Earth observation, what the Earth looks like from orbit, why we're there, what are we doing with that science. So what you're trying to do is kind of smooth the gaps between them, to blend them all together. That never takes away from the fact that the pilots are skilled eye-hand coordination experts and things like that, where the scientists are going to be there in order to operate the payloads that we're carrying, you know. Generally, what we've been trying to do is induct a group of people like once a year. We get a class of people in and maybe say there's a dozen in an arbitrary sense, about half pilots and half scientists. And as time goes on then, the first few weeks they're here, we give them a lot of training in how to ride in the T-38 jets that we use for transportation.
A very major part of living and working in space is learning to function with no gravity to hold anything still or to keep things where they're supposed to be. It looks fun and interesting, but every astronaut says after the novelty wears off, weightlessness is maddening and confusing, at least in the beginning. They say you miss dear old gravity. Well, miss it or not, it's just not there. And they have to teach the new people what to expect, what it feels like. Well, they do that in two ways. The most spectacular is on board this Air Force jet, a KC-135. Here's how they do it. They fly up in an arc, then at the peak, like a roller coaster coming over the top, they nose the plane straight down. Terrific speed builds up, and for about 30 or 40 seconds, everyone inside is weightless. Later, they will be taught to perform functions as if they were in a shuttle. On this day, they did this over and over, more than 20 times. Unofficially, the astronauts call this the burp bucket, because some people get sick. But trainers say that this has nothing to do with how you'll react once you get used to it. Linda Godwin, the astronaut from the class of 1985, rode many times in the KC-135. And, like all newcomers, she spent a lot of time in this big pool. They call it the wet F tank. Underwater, there's nothing holding you up. You fall over or roll around as you learn how to handle tools and to complete a project in a way you'd never experience on dry land. But a lot like it is in space, simulating what you have to know when you go up.
I'm tethered off, and I'm thinking about putting in a manual after. Okay. Done step 1 and 2 of that checklist. Step 3 is IUS, install manual aft on the starboard, lock and insert the pip pin.
So, okay. Tether it to... So I'll have to go this way.
And computer-driven simulators are a very big part of all the training. Here again is Frank Hughes.
There's a hierarchy of simulators. You go from real simple part test trainers up to very grandiose mission simulators that are expensive to run and are complex, so you have many instructors and so on. And overall, what it comes down to is you're growing this person like an onion. That is, you're putting layer on layer on very simple things at first and more detail. And as they get more sophisticated, more detail is added each time in all of the systems. So they get across the board, they get an understanding of the complexity of the machine, plus how to work it.
And as unexciting as it looks, a big part of the program are the endless hours of classroom instruction. More computer work, and at night, alone, uncounted hours of individual study. Sounds pretty routine. But here's another fact. Up there, things go wrong. That can be deadly. When John Glenn went up for that first true orbital flight, he was cleared for 7 orbits.
Lots of grades fired, okay.
Roger, 7. You have a go. At least 7 orbits.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around.
Those 7 orbits never happened. He only went around 3 times. They called him back under emergency conditions because a warning light was flashing, indicating Glenn's capsule had lost its heat shield. Well, that meant there was the possibility that the whole craft would disintegrate and burn to cinders when it plunged back into Earth's atmosphere.
Roger. Say again your instructions, please. Over. We are recommending that the retro package not, I say again, not be jettisoned. This means that you will have to override the 05G switch, which is expected to occur at 044353. This is approximately 4.5 minutes from now. This also means that you will have to retract the scope manually. Do you understand? Roger.
Glenn took over the controls and manually guided the capsule into re-entry. It was the warning light that went wrong, not the heat shield. But at the time, no one knew it was a false signal. Today's astronauts still get many hours of training in using parachutes, on land and in the sea. They don't come down in the water anymore. At least they don't expect to. But that's what survival training is all about, dealing with the unexpected. In 1961, during recovery of the second Mercury mission, the hatch on Gus Grissom's floating capsule blew open prematurely. Water poured in. Grissom's helmet was off, and water began filling up in his spacesuit. He grew heavier and heavier. He almost drowned. They were able to pull out Grissom, but when the helicopter tried to lift his capsule, it was just too heavy. The chopper began to go down. At the last minute, they had to cut the capsule loose. It went straight to the bottom. Well, if for some reason today's astronauts must bail out over water, they're ready. They are trained to survive in any wilderness. Again, they don't expect to use these lessons, but it's all part of the program. There's also something going on in the training that isn't quite so obvious.
This is Space Cadet 2. We're in an open meadow. It's at the end of a valley that's running approximately northeast by southwest.
Training builds confidence, convincing the astronauts they can deal with whatever comes up.
In April of 1970, 3 astronauts were headed for the moon: Jim Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Hayes. The problem came when an oxygen tank on board blew up.
Right by the high gate antenna, the whole panel is blown out, almost from the base to the engine. Copy that.
They lost power and went days without sleep as they fought to control the capsule in its orbit around the moon. While on the ground, everyone at NASA was working desperately to find a way to get them back home. During the emergency, the astronauts realized the air they were breathing was becoming dangerously polluted with carbon dioxide. Well, that's where this picture comes in. With some tape and a spring, they rigged up this chemical canister to purify the air. Well, now with some room to breathe, the entire Apollo team on the ground and in the air pulled together. In 72 hours, they accomplished what should have taken 3 months. The NASA team came up with an emergency plan that safely got the astronauts home. Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes had time to escape catastrophe. At 11:38 on the morning of January 28, 1986, the crew of Space Shuttle Flight 51L had no time. The Challenger exploded shortly after liftoff, killing all 7 crew members.
Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Ron McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judy Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe, the first American schoolteacher ever selected for space travel.
Well, Gus Grissom, who was killed 19 years earlier, said, "We're in a risky business." But then he added, "We hope if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program." Well, the Challenger tragedy did delay the program for a while, but now it goes on. And so do our memories of those who died to pave the way for future astronauts.
6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start. Liftoff of America's first space shuttle. And the shuttle has cleared the tower.